Don't eat anything, sweetie. We saved the best for you. My mother's text read. I hadn't eaten all day, rushing straight from my shift to the upscale downtown steakhouse where my parents were celebrating their 30th anniversary. But when I walked in, the party was already over. The table was covered in empty wine glasses and deserted plates, and my family was putting on their coats. My mother smiled, squeezed my shoulder, and slipped a leather folder into my hand. We left you a little bite, but someone has to settle up, she whispered with a smirk. Inside was a $2,400 bill for a dinner I didn't even attend. When I refused to pay, my brother called me ungrateful, and my mother threatened to cut me off forever. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had no idea I held the one secret that could destroy them all. My name is Clara. I'm 31 years old, working as a freelance graphic designer, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the designated safety net of the Vance family. Whenever something went wrong, whenever a bill needed covering, or whenever my younger brother Julian needed a fresh start, my mother Evelyn would look to me. I was the reliable one, the golden goose who worked long hours, rarely complained, and swallowed her feelings to keep the peace. So when my mother invited me to celebrate her and Dad's 30th wedding anniversary at the Obsidian, the most expensive steakhouse in the city, I thought it was a step toward building a better relationship. Evelyn told me the dinner started at 8:30 p.m. She urged me not to eat beforehand because they were going to order the grand tasting menu. I spent my whole afternoon finishing client deadlines, my stomach growling, excited to finally be included in a family celebration. I arrived at the Obsidian at precisely 8:20 p.m. But as the hostess led me to the private dining alcove, my heart sank. The table was in complete disarray. Bone-dry wine glasses stood in clusters, empty vintage bottles sat on ice, and waiters were already wrapping up leftovers. My parents were zipping up their jackets, and Julian was casually slipping a pair of silk cufflinks into his pocket. "Oh, Clara," Evelyn beamed, her tone dripping with mock affection as she checked her diamond watch. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence." Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh. Still as clueless as ever. "How could you be late to Mom and Dad's 30th anniversary?" I stood there, frozen, checking my phone. The text from my mother clearly said 8:30 p.m. That was when I looked at the timestamp on the paper menu left on the table. The reservation had been for 6 p.m. They hadn't invited me late by accident. They had invited me exactly when their meal was ending. Before I could process the betrayal, my mother walked up to me, patted my cheek condescendingly, and handed me the heavy leather checkbook folder the waiter had just left on the table. "Since you missed the feast, we left you a couple of bread rolls," Evelyn said smoothly. "We're heading home now. Cover the bill, will you, sweetie? Consider it your gift to us." I opened the folder. The total at the bottom stared back at me in bold print, $2,418.50. Julian had ordered 3 bottles of a rare $400 Cabernet, and my parents had added double portions of aged Wagyu beef, seafood towers, and top-shelf cognac. I didn't eat a single bite of this food, I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of shock and anger. "Mom, I can't pay for this." Julian's face instantly darkened. "Are you serious right now, Clara? It's Mom and Dad's 30th anniversary. After everything they've done for you, you're going to throw a temper tantrum over a little money? God, you're so cheap." "A little money?" I retorted, turning to my father, who kept his eyes fixed on the floor, as passive as he'd been my entire life. "Dad, did you know about this?" "Don't bring your father into this," Evelyn snapped, dropping her sweet facade. Her eyes narrowed into icy slits. "You make good money with your little computer business. You have savings. If you walk out of here without paying this bill and humiliate us, do not bother calling me ever again. You will be dead to this family." The threat hung in the air like poison. The waiters were lingering nearby, casting awkward glances at our table. I felt the hot, burning shame rising up my neck. I realized right then that if I created a scene, they would spin it to the entire extended family, turning me into the selfish daughter who ruined her parents' landmark anniversary. Hands shaking, I pulled out my debit card and handed it to the waiter. Evelyn smiled triumphantly, leaned in, and murmured, "That's a good girl." They walked out into the cool night air, leaving me sitting alone at an empty, dirty table with a $2,400 hole in my bank account and a cold bread roll. The next 48 hours were an absolute nightmare. My phone blew up with angry text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins. Evelyn had already worked her magic, telling everyone that I had shown up late, acted sullen, and begrudgingly chipped in for dinner while complaining the entire night. "How could you treat your mother like that?" one aunt wrote. "You should be ashamed of yourself," a cousin added. I sat at my kitchen desk, staring at my bank statement. It wasn't just the $2,400. As I scrolled back through months and years of transactions, a sickening pattern emerged. $300 here for Julian's car repairs, $600 there for Evelyn's emergency plumbing issue. I had given them over $15,000 in the past 2 years alone, driven by a deep, desperate desire to earn the love they only ever offered when my checkbook was open. Enough was enough. I logged onto my banking app, changed all my passwords, and revoked the secondary credit card I had lent my mother for emergencies. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Evelyn, screaming so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "What is the meaning of this?" she raged. "I just tried to buy a new purse, and your card was declined. Put the card back on right now, Clara." "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm done, Mom. I paid for your dinner, but I am never giving you or Julian another dime." Evelyn let out a cold, bitter laugh. "You think you can play hardball with me? You forget who holds the keys in this family. My mother's cottage, your precious grandmother Rose's house, is in my family trust. If you don't fall in line, apologize to Julian, and turn that card back on by Friday, I will put your grandmother in a state nursing facility and list that cottage on the market. Let's see how brave you are then." She slammed the phone down. My heart stopped. Grandmother Rose was 84, frail, and loved her small lakeside cottage more than life itself. My grandfather had built it with his own hands before he passed away. Evelyn had been managing the property paperwork for years, always dropping subtle hints that she controlled Rose's living situation. Panic setting in, I immediately called Grandmother Rose's personal attorney, Mr. Harrison, a family friend who had handled my grandfather's legal affairs decades ago. "Clara, dear," Mr. Harrison said gently over the phone. "I heard there was some tension, but what's this about Evelyn selling the cottage? She threatened to put Grandma in a home and sell the house if I don't give her money," I said, tears leaking down my face. "Can she actually do that? Is the cottage really in her name?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The sound of rustling paper filled the receiver. "Clara," Mr. Harrison said, his tone turning dead serious. "Your grandfather set up a very specific structure before he died. I think you need to come to my office right away. There are documents here you were never shown." An hour later, I was sitting in Mr. Harrison's mahogany-paneled office. He placed a thick, yellowed manila folder in front of me labeled, "The Vance Family Estate and Trust. Your mother has been telling everyone for 10 years that she is the sole executor of your grandfather's estate," Mr. Harrison explained, sliding a legal document toward me. "That is a lie." I scanned the pages, my eyes widening with every line. When my grandfather died, he knew my mother Evelyn was terrible with money and that my brother Julian would grow up spoiled. So, he bypassed Evelyn entirely. The primary beneficiary of the entire estate, including the family house, the lakeside cottage, and a $300,000 investment fund, was set to pass directly to me the moment I turned 30 years old. "Why didn't I know about this?" I gasped. "Because your mother was appointed as the temporary administrator until your 30th birthday," Mr. Harrison revealed. "She was legally required to notify you and hand over the estate key last year when you turned 30. Instead, she concealed the paperwork, forged your signature on annual trust renewals, and has been illegally drawing a management stipend from your grandfather's investment fund to finance her lifestyle and pay off Julian's credit cards." He pulled out an accounting spreadsheet. Over the last 6 years, Evelyn and Julian had illegally siphoned out $184,000 from my rightful inheritance. They didn't just trick me into paying for a $2,400 dinner. They had been stealing my entire life's foundation right out from under me. "What do we do?" I asked, a cold, sharp clarity washing over me. Mr. Harrison smiled grimly. Well, Clara, legally, you own the house she lives in, you own the cottage, and she has committed felony grand larceny and trust fraud. The choice is entirely yours. On Friday evening, Evelyn called an emergency family meeting at her house. She had invited my aunts, uncles, and even a few family friends, planning to stage a public intervention where they would all pressure me into surrendering control of my finances. When I walked into her living room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Evelyn sat in her armchair like a queen on a throne, with Julian standing behind her, arms crossed, looking smug. Thank you all for coming, Evelyn announced dramatically, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. We are here because Clara has fallen into a dark place. She has turned her back on her family, refused to support her parents, and is threatening our harmony. My Aunt Susan shook her head, looking at me with disappointment. Clara, how could you be so heartless to your own mother? I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply walked over to the coffee table, opened my leather briefcase, and pulled out a stack of bound legal documents. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice echoing across the quiet room. We do need to talk about family harmony. And we need to talk about money. Julian scoffed. Oh, here come the excuses. Are you finally going to pay us back for the embarrassment you caused at the restaurant? I'm not paying you back for dinner, Julian, I said calmly. In fact, I'm here to ask when you and Mom plan on paying me back. Evelyn's eyes flickered with a sudden, sharp anxiety. What are you talking about? Stop playing games, Clara. I tossed the first document onto the table in front of my aunt. That is the forensic audit of grandfather's estate. As it turns out, I turned 30 last year, which means, according to grandfather's registered will, I am the 100% owner of the lakeside cottage, the investment trust, and this very house you are sitting in. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Julian laughed nervously. She's crazy. Mom, tell her she's crazy. Evelyn tried to stand up, but her knees seemed to give out slightly. That's private family business. You have no right. I have every right, I snapped, dropping the second document on the table, a formal notice from the state prosecutor's office and Mr. Harrison's legal firm. Because over the last 6 years, you and Julian have illegally forged my signature and stolen $184,000 from my trust. You used my inheritance to buy Julian's sports car, pay off his gambling debts, and purchase vintage wine at the Obsidian. Aunt Susan gasped, picking up the paperwork. Evelyn, is this true? Is this Clara's money? Evelyn's face went completely bloodless. The arrogant, controlling mother vanished, replaced by a terrified woman realizing the floor had just caved in beneath her feet. Clara, sweetie, Evelyn stammered, her voice trembling. We were just holding it for you. We were going to give it back once Julian got on his feet. You threatened to put Grandmother Rose in a state home to force me into giving you my credit card. I yelled, stepping closer to her. You tricked me into coming to your anniversary dinner, just so I would be stuck paying your $2,400 bill while you laughed behind my back. You are not a mother. You are a parasite. Julian stepped forward, panic written all over his face. Clara, come on, we're brother and sister. You can't do this to us. What are you going to do? I looked at them both, the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel small, guilty, and worthless. Here are my terms, I said, my voice cold as ice. First, Grandmother Rose's cottage is being transferred fully and exclusively into my name by Monday morning. She will live there comfortably, undisturbed, for the rest of her life, with all her expenses covered by the trust. Second, I continued, pointing directly at Julian. Julian will surrender his car, which was bought with stolen trust funds, to be liquidated back into the account. He will also sign a legally binding repayment plan for the remaining balance. And third, I looked down at my mother, who is now weeping silently in her chair. You will sign a full confession of trust fraud prepared by Mr. Harrison. If you sign it, I will not press criminal charges, and I will allow you to stay in this house under a standard lease agreement where you pay me rent. If you refuse, The police are waiting for my call, and you will both be facing felony grand larceny charges before the sun sets tonight." The room was dead silent. My aunts and uncles looked at Evelyn with absolute disgust. No one spoke up to defend her. No one called me selfish. Julian fell back onto the sofa, burying his head in his hands. Evelyn looked up at me, her eyes filled with defeat, and choked out 2 words. "I'll sign." 6 months have passed since that night. Grandmother Rose is happily living at the cottage, surrounded by her garden, completely unaware of the storm that took place. I visit her every weekend, and for the first time in my life, I feel a deep, unbroken peace. Julian was forced to sell his car and take a full-time job working night shifts at a distribution warehouse to meet his court-ordered monthly repayments to my estate. It's hard work, but for the first time in his life, he is learning what a dollar is actually worth. My mother still lives in the family house, but things are very different now. Every month, on the first of the month, she transfers rent directly into my account. We don't speak often. The toxic dynamic that governed my life for 30 years has been completely dismantled. Looking back, that $2,400 dinner bill was the most expensive meal I ever paid for. But in a strange way, it was worth every single penny. Because if my mother hadn't tried to trap me with that bill, I never would have looked closer. I never would have uncovered the truth, and I would still be sitting at their table, waiting for scraps of love that were never coming. Sometimes, the worst traps people set for you end up becoming the very key that sets you free. Now, I want to ask you, what would you have done if you walked into that restaurant and found that $2,400 bill waiting for you? Would you have paid it to keep the peace? Or would you have walked out right then and there? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic stories every week. Thank you for watching.